Okay, fifth grade. So today we're going to look at lesson 2, which is absolute value. We will also discuss opposites. So I'm actually going to put 2 different videos so you don't get confused. The first one is going to be absolute value. You're going to evaluate expressions using absolute value. So, and you do have practice work. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the practice work you're going to do. So opposites are numbers that are the same distance from 0 in either direction. Opposite value of a number is the distance between that number and 0. Okay, so we're going to talk about what all of that means. And this is just an example of evaluating the expression the absolute value of -2 is. And then today you're going to do opposites, and then you're going to evaluate these expressions. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here are your notes for absolute value. I'm going to zoom out. So absolute value, again, absolute value is the distance between a number and 0 on a number line. Okay, so I did an example here. I did a number line, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3. So one of the things that you're going to see is you're going to see these symbols here. That's 3. You're going to see these vertical lines here right outside of a digit 3, and we read that as the absolute value of 3. Okay, so the absolute value of 3 equals 3. Now what that means is when I'm at 0, if I'm looking at the number 3, which is right here on the number line, it is exactly 3 units away from 0. So that's the absolute value. So the absolute value is the distance between 0 and a number. So if I look at -3, again, we read this as the absolute value of -3. So if I go to -3 here, what is the distance between -3 and 0? The distance is the same. It is also 3 units. So the absolute value of -3 equals 3. Now, if you notice, if I have an absolute value of a +3 and an absolute value of a -3, both of my answers are the same. And that's because we are measuring the distance between the number and 0. Okay, so -3 and 3 are each 3 units from 0. That's why the absolute value is 3 for both of those. One of the things I want to point out to you guys is absolute value will always be positive, okay? Unless, so we have an exception to this rule. I'm going to zoom out so you can see those notes and make sure you're writing these down. Unless there's a negative symbol that's outside of the absolute value symbol. So here's the example here. So how do I read this? This says the absolute value of -3, then I have a -3 or a negative outside of here. So I would solve in here, just like grouping symbols. What's the absolute value of -3? Absolute value is of -3 is 3, and then I'm going to bring down that negative symbol. So my answer is -3. So this is the only time that your absolute value is not going to be positive. It's if this negative symbol is outside, okay? So if you need a pause, I'm going to zoom out. If you need to pause and create or write down these notes, you can go ahead and do that. Again, I would highly suggest you write them because they might come in handy, okay? So if you need a pause, you can pause it and you can go ahead and write down these notes, okay? So let's look at what that looks like. So if I'm evaluating these expressions, you're going to see the word evaluate. You're going to see the word expression. These are new vocabulary words that you are now going to start using. So we're going to evaluate these expressions. So the first one we have here is we're going to evaluate the absolute value of -7. Now, if I used my number line, right? If I use my number line, here's a number line, and I found -7 right here, and I find 0 right here, what is the distance between -7, and 0. So if I counted these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the distance between is 7. So the absolute value of -7 is 7. Now, once you solve it, you don't put these symbols back. You just solve it. Okay, so looking at the next one. Now we have expressions that have plus sign. You're going to see some with plus, subtraction. Eventually, you're going to see some with multiplication. So I'm going to solve this first. So just like in grouping symbols, what's the absolute value of 5? So the distance between 0 and 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5 plus, what is the absolute value of -6? Now remember, absolute value will always be positive unless there's a negative symbol out here. So what's the distance between -6 and 0? 6. Now I can solve. 5 plus 6 equals 11. Now we're going to evaluate this next expression. So this says the absolute value of -7 minus the absolute value of 3. So what is the absolute value of -7? Remember, it's that distance from 0. And we figured that out earlier. That's 7. Minus the absolute value of 3. The distance between 3 and 0 is 3. So when I subtract, I get 4. So this is how we solve absolute value expressions. Now the next one we're going to do are called opposites. Now I don't want you to get them confused, so that's why I'm making a second video.